Hi, I'm Richard Semmens from Engine Shed, South London.
Can you first of all tell me a little bit about Engine Shed, how it came about and what exactly you do?
The first Engine Shed was set up by a group of parents in Essex as a support group for their autistic children. One of the parents then moved across to Reading and set another one up there. I went to visit them a couple of years ago and I was just amazed at what they were able to do. And with their permission, I've set up Engine Shed South London, which is much more mobile and larger scale. And we go around, we run open days across South London, we run after school clubs, and we go to venues such as the Bluebell Railway and the Science Museum to run specifically for autism events for them.
What inspired you to set up the South London Engine Shed?
Somewhat late in the day, I was diagnosed myself with autism at the age of 51. And that sort of got me into the autism community, the many families with autistic children, and also autistic adults as well, and just sort of finding out what there was available and also what there wasn't. And through various groups, that sort of linked me into the Engine Shed groups I mentioned. And going to see them, it was... I've come from an event management teaching background, and so it sort of made sense to try and develop the idea. And now it's very much becoming my job.
What kind of activities you do if say, a parent with an autistic child was looking for something to do or some help? Is it just about trains or is it beyond that, more than that?
Face value, it's all about trains. We take over a large venue, a sports hall, and if you can imagine the entire floor covered with Brio train sets, Tomy Trackmaster, and at times we can also build and run a small Hornby electric train set as well. The whole idea of the event is that the children are entirely in charge. They decide what they're doing, and it can run for 2-3 hours. From what you read about autistic children, they apparently struggle in a large, noisy environment, having to work with other children. And yet, when we run an Engine Shed session, you will get children who were there from the very first minute, and they don't want to go at the end. There is something about them being able to play with other autistic children. There is a real understanding between them. There's a real communication between them. Not always verbal, but you can see there's a lot of interactions going on. And the real thing that works about it is that they're having to sort of work together, in that they're not just working on, having all their own separate trains as they might have at home. They are working together, and they just realise that they all sort of, think and communicate in similar ways. And I've had people coming in and sort of looking at our activities and not realising that I have a room of 20-25 autistic children there. The sort of calmness and the working together is astonishing.
That's interesting because I know some autistic children who do seem to be very much loners, and they just like their own company and doing their own little thing. And you say there that they are working together. Perhaps it is that identifying kindred spirits.
A lot of the struggles autistic people have is that they struggle to sort of communicate or relate to what we call neurotypical non-autistic people, how they communicate with them, how they sort of expect them to relate to them, the way conversations might go, what they expect them to say and what they expect them to do. If you can, as much as possible, remove that, also possibly remove any extremes of sort of sensory, when I'm talking about heat, light, noise, touch, smells as well. With some autistic people, they have very heightened sensory levels, and that can be extremely distracting. So again, if you can remove those or reduce them as much as possible, so you end up in a situation where the autistic people can just be themselves without worrying about how they might be seen by others or how they need to react. We've occasionally had other people, sort of siblings and friends, come along to our sessions who aren't autistic, and it's quite interesting to see them actually finding the whole Engine Shed activity quite awkward, because they're not finding the same sort of means of communication and working with people that they're used to. it's quite interesting to it sort of flips the whole thing on its head, where the autistic people are actually in the vast majority, and the neurotypical people actually find it quite difficult to do what everybody else is doing.
I came across an article in the Telegraph fairly recently, which suggested that their autistic children in particular had a fascination with trains. What is it with autistic children and trains?
This is one of these special interests, as they're referred to, which autistic people have. They have this sort of real focus, real interest in one particular thing, one particular person, a particular type of object, particular music, and they can have that interest, that special interest, sometimes for years, sometimes for life. Others they will have a special interest for a period of time and then suddenly move on to something else. Railways are quite an obvious one because people can see or they hear about children's interest in trains, in Thomas the Tank Engine, whatever it might be. The special interests are quite interesting. They are something which the children find really useful to focus on. It gives them a feeling of self-worth, learning about them, being able to talk to other people about them, often at length. And that it also provides them with a focus which they can use to sort of shut out some of the distractions and those sort of environmental issues which I mentioned earlier. So trains happens to be one, and is, I say, quite obvious to other people. There are people who have quite a particular interest in a particular band, in a particular actor. I know somebody who had a special interest in African dictators, as you do. So a huge amount of research going in. You will find autistic people will be very keen users of YouTube videos and often go over and over the same ones to sort of gain that encyclopedic knowledge. It's a sort of a way of dealing with their environment, but it's also something they're not just doing it for that. They're doing it for to learn the information. With regards to why trains, everything you read gives a different suggestion. There's something about the predictability of them, the sort of logical, specific order of them, but the interest in trains can vary. I get some children, adults I work with who like the sort of engineering, the building side of things. Others that like make up stories about the characters in the trains, the idea of the Thomas the Tank Engine stories. Others like the sort of purely the moving parts and the actual operating of them. So even within their sort of special interest of trains, they have lots of different ways of engaging with it.
And on the subject of trains, you've got an event coming up at the Bluebell Railway in a couple of weeks' time, which I gather has sold out. So whilst we can't suggest anyone listening goes along to it, at least not this event, how did that come about and what are you actually doing at the Bluebell Railway?
It was one of those sort of chance conversations. I was down there for another reason with somebody else's event, and I just thought I'd ask them what they do for special needs children, particularly autistic children. And I find this with quite a lot of organisations. They realise that they would like to do something, not necessarily for commercial purposes, but they realise that for to expand their audience and to be sort of something for the community, they feel they sort of should do something, but they're not quite sure how to do that. And in fact, running an autism event is often not a case of necessarily adding anything to what's there. It's often taking a few things away that might just be a little bit too much, and providing a more sort of focused, simplified version. So I've been working with the Bluebell over the last few weeks so my engine sheds trains will be going down there, so we'll have our own session in one of the station buildings. We'll take them around on a guided tour into a few sort of places around so they can actually get to see the main railway. That will actually help them sort of gear themselves up to actually have a trip on the train itself, where we'll have our own reserved carriage, so there won't be any issues of people feeling awkward about their sort of behaviour, conversation or whatever. And so we'll have a trip on the railway, and the staff have been really approachable and welcoming, and we're going to have an opportunity just to sort of brief them in advance, just so that they're aware of what's going on. And I'm hoping this will well become a regular event at the Bluebell, and also any other sort of attraction or venue. I find it very useful having an autistic brain to be able to just look at a venue, look at an event, and go, okay, we just a little bit of tweaking around the edges. And you can do something which will be sort of easily accessible by autistic adults or autistic children. So hopefully we'll get more of that in the future.
Because I also understand that you're running activities at the special needs events at the Science Museum, the London Science Museum.
Yes, they've been running events for quite a few years now. They're sort of pioneers in this. These events always have a habit of being either very early in the day or at the end of the day. That's really to make sure that the museum is sort of relatively quiet and the general public aren't in there. It's not the greatest time in the world to get children up and around. They are sort of listening to people and actually now going to be running some sort of late afternoon and evening sessions. They basically sort of provide a sort of focus-themed set of activities, and the engine shed will be in amongst that. And then they sort of merge into one of their normal sort of public open days, but still keeping an area of the museum sort of exclusively for special needs children to use. So they've really been leading it. A lot of other museums are looking at it, and hopefully they will sort of, following the lead of the Science Museum and others, they will be able to produce other similar events as well.
I suppose if one museum has done it and has got something to show for it, and also has gained some experience in organising an event like this, then that can, in some respects, I guess, be a template for future events.
It can. I've seen a couple of examples where that sort of template hasn't been sort of fully understood, and the idea that you can just turn the lights down low, turn all the videos off, and give them a bag of sensory toys, that sort of magically turns a museum into an autism-friendly event. That can sort of go sort of too far, and you end up with a sort of rather dead space that doesn't really have any sort of attraction for anybody, even if the children are interested in the subject. So you have to sort of think a little bit more and try and put on something which is sort of specific and sort of special for them. And so just sort of, again, one thing to bear in mind, that the children are probably coming to somewhere that they've never been before, with a lot of other people that they don't know, and that in itself can sort of crank up their anxiety levels.
Yeah, I suppose it can be intimidating in a way, yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, to everybody going somewhere new, somewhere different, you're not quite sure where to go, you don't know what time the things are running, you don't want to miss anything because you paid for it. There is always that slight levels of stress. You crank that up by a sort of factor of 10, and you're beginning to get some at the level of an autistic person walking into a museum, even one they know that they've been to before. So it's a case of just trying to make those things as easy as possible. Be completely understanding. If people have mannerisms, way of speaking, vocalizations, that's them. They're not strange. They're not sort of threatening. That's just how they are. And so again, just being able to brief the staff and whoever's working there, about that, it just sort of smooths over all the edges. And end result is you get a lot of happy children at the end of it.
Richard, thank you very much for talking to Surrey Sound.